We're Laura and Cindy, and you're listening to the Holistic Horsemanship and Husbandry podcast, where we talk about natural horsekeeping and deepening your connection with your horse. I'm Laura, your horse care mentor. I teach natural horse management practices after working with over 200 horses and seeing how current industry standards are compromising the health of the horse.
And I'm Cindy, your horsemanship mentor, offering a proven and unique approach to creating deep connections with your horses from 20 plus years of experience, including working with wild Mustangs. If you enjoy this conversation, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to us so we can get this podcast into the ears of more passionate horse people.
So today we are going to dive into your horse's hoof health. And before we go into the specifics, I want to get you to understand why this is really important. So when I look at a horse's hoof, I can't tell you immediately on first look whether I'm looking at the chicken or the egg in terms of, is the hoof causing problems or is the hoof telling me that there's problems? But I can look at a hoof and know, is there things in this horse that need to be addressed, or is this horse operating at a pretty dang healthy level? And that is incredibly powerful information to be able to have. And then once you really get to know your horse's hooves, you can track changes and see things happening in their health really early and really fast and be on top of them. And this is a huge hole in the horse community's knowledge that I am on a mission to fill. And as you're listening to this podcast, you might hear a coo or a hiccup because baby is earthside. She's 12 weeks old and she is here on my lap with her Auntie Cindy. They've been yakking over Zoom.
And I am loving, I'm sorry, this is totally off topic. I am loving watching Sophie watch her mom in the Zoom
screen,
and she's just doing these all kinds of facial expressions like, what the heck? But anyway, Laura, I am excited about this topic because I know a lot about horses, but I don't know as much as I could about the hoofs. And I bet that there's a whole lot more out there just like me. So I want to ask you some questions.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
The first question is, what made you take a deeper look and want to learn more about hoof care? What started this?
I came up in horses through rescue horses. I have seen some ugly hooves. And I have spent hundreds of hours holding the horse for the farrier at the rescue. And it was like this multifaceted thing where I was seeing how farriers don't always know how to approach a really nervous horse. And so I had this really deep desire, like, oh my gosh, at every rescue, there's 4 or 5 horses that if I just knew how to trim, I could take my time with this animal and do it myself, and it would be so much better off. And now I don't want to say that, your farrier is not a trainer. Your farrier is not there to help your horse get over trauma. That's your job. And so I didn't have any ill will toward these guys who were doing their best. They don't, if they're having to spend more than a half an hour on your horse because of its behavior or its physical limitations, they need to be paid more. And the rescues aren't in the right position to be able to do that. So this was just a problem that I was seeing. I was not blaming the farriers that were being very gifting with their bodies and their time. But it was like, oh my gosh, these horses' trauma is getting worse, not better because of this. I wish I could take half a day with these guys and really take their time on how to do it. Then from a physical standpoint, because I've seen so many horses come in, horrible nutrition, horrible falling apart hooves, I see the transformation in their hooves first when we start turning an animal's health around. And it's like, oh my gosh, your horse's health is impacting so much here. And seeing a horse go from these crazy sled shoes to just running beautifully, running sound, looking better. I saw a statistic that 85% of lamenesses can be traced back to the hoof. And yet the more I studied and learned and looked, the more I realized that most horses are walking around with unbalanced hooves. Most shoers can make a beautiful metal shoe, but they don't know how to balance a hoof first. And so they're covering up problems. And if owners knew how to pick up a hoof and say, oh, that's in balance, or oh, it's not, we could be working with our farriers to fix this problem. So I just started seeing these holes in the industry, seeing how my farrier wouldn't put her on a shorter trim cycle, even though I knew that there was issues that needed to be solved that we couldn't solve in one trim. That was super frustrating for me. And it was just like, nope, I come on 8 weeks and that's what I do, and too bad for you. And so I started looking into how can I fix it myself?
And so how did you learn to fix it yourself?
I have been incredibly fortunate. I met 3 people in quick succession that took me under their wing. It started with some trimming out at the rescue where a trainer was actually doing trimming. And so he was taking his time with the horses. He was a trimmer and a trainer. And I was like, I want to learn how to do these guys so that I can take this time like you are. And he took half a day and he taught me how to see it. And we found out that I have a little bit of OCD and symmetrical balance is something that my eyes picked up on really, really, really quickly. And I was like, oh, yes, I can see. So your horse's hoof should be the same shape as his coronet band. So if he's got a funny wallop in his coronet band, he's going to have it in his hoof. But if it's a nice symmetrical circle or oval, his hoof should look the same. And as soon as I learned these maps and locations to look at, I can look at a hoof like that and tell you if it's in balance or not, because I'm a little bit OCD. So I started from that point, from learning from him, I started picking up feet, looking at feet, noticing things. And then I was very lucky. My farrier and her mentor took me under their wing the first time MJ got hurt and said, you need to learn how to trim your horse yourself. We're going to teach you. And they helped me for a full year. And now I've been trimming MJ for 2 years myself and a couple other friends here and there as they need me.
Nice. So you touched on it, but I just feel the need to ask more. You touched on a lot of horses that you see that have lamenesses. It goes back to the feet. Can you tell me more about that?
So what you want to do is you want to look at your horse's hoof right after your farrier trims. And you want to see, is that hoof in balance? You pick up the hoof so that it's the toes pointed down at the ground and you're looking down that hoof, down the sole of that hoof. It should be left to right perfectly evenly. The left side or the right side should not be sticking out more than the other. And so when you pick up the hoof right after your farrier leaves, then you know, is my farrier not getting my hoof balanced? Because that can happen. Or is my horse having a lameness higher up in their leg that's causing them to load their hoof incorrectly and causing one side of the hoof to wear down more than the other? It's important to know which one of those, because obviously you're going to approach them very differently. MJ loads slightly to the inside. And so I know that I have to pick up my rasp every 2 weeks and take a credit card's width, like 2 millimeters off the inside of the outside of those hooves to keep her balanced up. Because otherwise all of the muscles and everything up higher in her body are going to continue to get tighter and more patterned in that movement. But if I help her hooves land flat and keep them nice and balanced, her body will adjust to that. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever looked at your horse and wondered if they're thriving in your care? Is there more you can do to give them the best life possible? Most ranches and boarding facilities are set up for convenience, not horse health, but there's tons you can do to fix your horse's situation if you're willing to get creative. Join Evidence-Based Horsekeeping, my Facebook group where members learn how to improve the mental and physical well-being of their horses. The link is in the show notes.
So when you say loads, what do you mean?
When she puts her hoof down on the ground, the inside touches before the outside.
Gotcha.
When you watch your horse walk, you want them to land heel and then toe, heel and then toe, and that should be even like the middle of the heel to the middle of the toe, not a funny outside or inside roll.
Sounds a lot like us.
Exactly.
So I have a question in regards to this, looking right after the farrier's left. What if the horse has shoes on?
You can still see that balance because you're going to notice like your whole shoe is going to look crooked if you have basically one more hoof wall on one side or the other. And also you can look at your shoes. Your shoes might have one side worn down more than the other, and that's also an indicator.
So pay attention to the shoes as before the farrier comes
Yes.
and when the farrier takes them off.
And sometimes your farrier is just going to reshape the same shoe and put it back on because there's nothing wrong with that shoe, and sometimes he's going to have to rebuild it. That's another thing to pay attention to and know. When you talk to your farrier, I don't want you to say, oh my gosh, my hoof is unbalanced, you're fired. Ask your farrier why. Your farrier might say, I think your horse has some serious compensation issues and I'm scared to decompensate him because it's going to make him really sore for a long time. And then you can further educate yourself on that and chase that down. Or he might say, I've been slowly correcting this issue the whole time you've owned this horse and just not bothered to tell you. In which case, great, carry on. Or he might say, this is as good as I can do, which is code for you need a shorter trim cycle, and your farrier may or may not be willing to work with you on that one.
Yeah, I know in our area, good farriers, well, even the bad farriers, are all extremely booked.
Yes.
But I want to ask you, because we don't want to piss off our farriers, because often we get a little bit of information or a little bit of knowledge and we think we know more than we know, and we can ask the wrong questions or ask them in a way that offends our farrier. And then all of a sudden our farrier either doesn't return our calls or can't squeeze us in. That's code for you're fired.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, as we are being introduced to all of this today, and you, part of what you do is you are a member of a working team for horse owners. So you work with veterinarians, you work with farriers, you work with chiropractors, you work with body workers. What kind of questions can those of us who want to start being a little more proactive in our horses' hoofs care, what kind of questions are good, respectful, knowledge-seeking questions that we could ask our farrier about our own individual horses that isn't going to sound like we're questioning what he's doing, but we want to really learn?
Yeah, so a really good one is I'm learning to sight a hoof. That's what it's called when you pick a foot up and look at it. What's fancy term for pick a foot up and look at it? But I'm learning to sight a hoof. I want to see what a balanced hoof looks like. Can you show me on my horse what we're working toward? Maybe your horse has one perfectly balanced foot and one not so good. Can you show me those differences? Just educate me about my horse's hooves. What are you doing every time you trim? I just want to learn more. Now, red flag. Unfortunately, really good farriers are hard to find. And I want to talk about, before we end this podcast, what are some things that you can do if you're in a situation where you just can't find a really good farrier, and that's okay. But if you start trying to educate yourself and your farrier gets very defensive, that is a red flag that maybe we aren't doing the greatest job and we know it and we're not doing anything about it. So just be aware.
And I agree 100%. And the flip side of that coin is in your presentation of the question.
Yes, you are an open book that wants to learn. You are not, I'm checking up on you.
Yeah, when I have people ask me questions about my training techniques, I am all about educating what had just happened. But if somebody's coming at me with accusatory or suspicion, it will ruffle my feathers. Now, I've done enough personal development work that I recognize the triggers and take a deep breath and answer the question. But farriers are unique, and like Laura said and I said earlier, Finding a good farrier is hard. And I've been fortunate enough that I have had 4 farriers in my entire lifetime of having horses, and they all have gone through highly respectable farrier schools, and they go to the conventions and they do competitions, and they're good at what they do. And I treat them with the utmost respect. I'm on time, I book in advance, I pay them by Zelle, I tip them. I want a solid team for my herd. And in order to do that, I have to treat them with respect and care. So I didn't mean to get off on a tangent, but Laura and I want to be sure that as you're growing in your knowledge and you want to know more, we want to empower you in a way that these professionals receive you with the understanding that you truly want to know more. So that's how we know how it affects the horse's body, or if the body is affecting the hoof. Because I have Dakota, and you're going to work with Dakota, because Dakota has a shoulder injury that I suspect she got in the trailer, and it's undetectable on lameness exams, but I see it every day, and I see it in the way she holds her hoof. And I've actually retired her from riding because it's obviously that uncomfortable for her.
Oh my God.
And you can see atrophy in that shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had 2 different lameness exams on her, and it's so subtle that they call it unremarkable. However, it's very remarkable for this mare and her comfort level. So I'm going to ask my farrier when he comes how her hoof is wearing in relation, and see what he says about that, and then I'll give you the feedback. My next question is, what are your thoughts on shoes, barefoot, and boots?
All right. If your horse cannot be barefoot for everyday life, that doesn't mean you're going up into the mountains and crushing shale. Doesn't mean you're flying over jumps, especially if you're jumping on grass, your horse has to have shoes or some kind of traction. But for everyday life, if your horse cannot be barefoot there and live comfortably, you have a problem. Probably a nutrition problem. When people say, oh, he's thin-soled, or oh, genetically bad feet. Well, I can grow a whole new foot in a year. So if I work with a nutritionist, figure out, pull some blood, pull some hair on my horse, test my hay, look at all the information, put it all together, I can fill my horse's nutrition holes and grow a whole new foot. And that foot is going to be a rock crushing foot. When you meet nutrition needs on a barefoot horse and you have a good balanced trim, you will grow a killer hoof. But you have to be very patient because it takes a year. And your horse could be sore and uncomfortable for that year. And that's where a boot is wonderful, because it takes that soreness and that uncomfortableness away.
So if you're in the process of transitioning and doing nutritional protocol and all of that, do they wear the boot the whole entire day? Like my horses are in a rocky pasture. Would they wear that boot all day long?
Totally depends on the horse. The first thing you're going to do is you're just going to put them out there without the boots, and you're going to watch them walk around. And if they look like they're tiptoeing and like owie, 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 then you need to get your boots on.
Ready to unlock true freedom with your horse? Join Unbridled Freedom, our private Facebook group for women on a spiritual journey in horsemanship. We don't fix our horses, we transform ourselves. This is your space to embrace challenges, celebrate victories, and deepen your bond with your horse. If you're ready to lead with wisdom, compassion, and inner peace, join us today. Let's dance with our horses as one. The link is in the show notes below. But how do they like if this is the analogy that I use on the horses that I've like, okay, you're done. I'm gonna see if you can go barefoot.
But yeah.
Um, or they've just been trimmed and now they go back out in their raw in their pasture. When I've been wearing my shoes all winter long and then I decide come summer that I'm gonna run outside barefoot and do something, it's like ow, 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 my feet are super tender. But by the end of the summer, I'm walking all over the place barefoot. Do
Yes.
horses experience that same kind of thing? Because it seems like when they first get trimmed, some of them will be like, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. But within a week, they're like back to normal.
Yes. And so what you don't want to do is let your horse be so uncomfortable that all of a sudden you're getting lamenesses other places because they're moving their body funny and bad. So you're gonna watch them move, pay attention to how sore they are, and have them wear their boots sometimes and not other times, and slowly introduce that callus on their foot, not just throw them out there. Some of them you can. Some of them have great hard soles and have no problem. You take the shoes off, you throw them out there, and they're great. But some of them are very uncomfortable, and then you start getting stone bruises and abscesses and all that kind of stuff. And a really great way to know is to shoot an x-ray and measure your sole depth. And if your vet says, yes, you've got nice, thick soles, you can ask your horse to be a little tougher than if you have really thin soles. Because once you start getting abscesses and stone bruises and all that kind of stuff, you're going backwards, not forwards. So you don't want to just ask them to tough it out, but if you have that information, you can.
I have Rocky, my new Gypsy Vanner quarter horse cross, who came from Southern California, and I'm in high desert Nevada. And my pasture is mountainside, which is super, super rocky. It's wonderful for my wild Mustangs because it's similar to their terrain. So I have Mustangs who have been here actually 10 years this month, and they have never had their feet done. And their feet, maybe, to look at them, I can say, yeah, their toes are a little bit longer than we would normally like them to be. But because they're wild, I'm not going to put them through the stress of having those toes trimmed back because it's, weighing it out. But for Rocky, who I'm not sure has been on rocky terrain, he came with his shoes on the front feet and no shoes on his back feet, and he's got white soles. So before I ask you much more about Rocky, I want to run the fact by you that I have heard all of my life that horses with light colored white soles tend to be softer than the ones that have that gray darker hoof. Is that a wise tale or is that true?
I want to say that's a wise tale because MJ has one hoof that's half dark and half light. And I'm not like, oh, the other side of that hoof is much softer. Probably say that, well, not really. No, there's plenty of Mustangs out there with those light hoofs. Yeah.
Well, yeah, now that you mentioned, I was going to tell you he's paint, and RC was a paint, and he had those light colors. He did have one that was half and half. And then Chief, who is another paint who's wild, he's got the light colored hoofs, and his hoofs haven't been done, and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
pretty solid. But Rocky's got light colored hoofs, and um he seems to do okay out on the rocky pasture, and he seems to be fine on the trails, except I noticed the last time my farrier did him, which I don't know that I noticed the first time. For the first 3 or 4 days, he was super tender-footed on the hind.
So, okay, let's talk about what your farrier is doing to your horse's sole. So this is when your farrier takes out that knife and starts like slicing and dicing sideways. So you have your grooves where your frog is, and then your sole comes out from there. That spot where the grooves from the frog and the sole come together is called the bar. You absolutely want your farrier to be trimming your bars and making sure that they are not weight bearing, because that is a quick way to get an abscess in an uncomfortable horse. You absolutely want your farrier to be taking away dead sole so it looks flaky, and sometimes it's a little smelly, and because it's a lot more prone to thrush than the live sole. it's chalky. Live sole is waxy and it's not always super hard, especially if it's been wet. You can push on your horse's sole and feel give. So you don't want your farrier taking a lot of live sole. And it's very common with shoers to take a lot of sole off and they're like artificially creating the concavity of a natural hoof. But they're taking so much off that they're leaving the horse sore. So you want to look at your horse's foot before your farrier comes and say, okay, his bars are super overgrown. I know that needs to be trimmed. But you don't want your farrier to take off what's called the toe callus. So there's a little bit of raised sole at the toe. That's live sole. That's supposed to be there. Lots of shoers take it off because they're so trained to create a flat surface for a metal shoe to go. So even if they're barefoot trimming, they don't even think about it. They just take it off. That'll leave your horse sore after the trim and take time to build that back up.
Okay, so talked about shoes, boots, or barefoot. And do you want to just go straight into talking about why shoes aren't great? Since I mean, you were telling me about shoes, boots. I mean, how do we know? Should we put shoes on them, boots on them, or barefoot? Like Rocky came with shoes on his front feet. And I'm assuming, I mean, he was a mounted police horse, so I know that they spent a lot of time on asphalt and in town. So I'm assuming that he had shoes on the front feet for that purpose.
Yeah.
But I here at my ranch and my personal philosophy and preference is I would prefer to have my horses as natural as possible. I don't blanket here. I don't bathe them all the time. I want my horses to be as natural as they possibly can. And so I would love to take his shoes off of him, but I just don't know if that's the best thing for him.
So you just have to be willing to be super curious through the process. You can always put shoes back on. It's not oh my gosh, I took his shoes off and now I'm committed to this. But because he's doing really well barefoot in the back, I'll be very surprised if he can't be transitioned to barefoot in the front. And I am very anti-shoe because of what it does to the horse's heels and how important the horse's heels and frogs are for their cushion when they walk. So if you have a horse that is always, always, always in shoes, I can guarantee you that your horse has what we call contracted heels. So what happens is the blood supply to the hoof only goes down the back of the leg. There's no blood supply that goes down the front of the leg. And when we put a metal shoe on a horse's hoof actually expands and contracts when they step. And when we put a metal shoe on a horse's hoof, we stop that expansion and contraction. It just becomes a fixed, unmoving structure. And that expansion and contraction is what pumps that blood through the structures of the hoof. So when we go years and years and years you're reducing your horse's blood flow, their frog starts to become pencil thin and it starts to die. And your horse's hoof heel bulbs should look like big, beautiful boobies.
My horse's heel
bulbs. Heel bulbs. Okay. So when your horse is standing.
Yeah, no, I just didn't. Oh, go ahead and explain what that means, but I didn't understand what you said.
Heel bulb. When your horse is standing and you see two little bumps from the back of their hoof, that's their hoof. They should look like big, wide, beautiful boobies. And if they are more coming together in a triangle and there's a huge split up the middle, that is a problem. But horse's ability to heel is insanely good. And you can pull those shoes and you're going to go through a lot of heel pain because they're walking on dead tissue and you have to bring the circulation. They actually lose feeling in their feet.
Yikes.
When I see a horse whose feet are they look small, they don't look right, and then I see that their heel bulbs are super contracted, I'm like, holy cow, that horse has been going years without proper circulation to their feet. And I know that their feet are actually partially numb. And then you see them getting spooky and dancy, and you're like, they can't trust their feet. To rehab that hoof is a process, but it can be done.
I don't know. I'm sure you have probably seen it, Laura. I share it often on my Facebook page, and maybe we can share a picture of it or a link to the
Mhm.
picture of it in our show notes of the vascular system within the horse's hoof is one of the most beautiful pieces of art I have ever seen.
Yep.
And we have no idea how many blood vessels and arteries and I mean not tendons, just
There are. I just learned this recently. There's a million little tendons all around the navicular bone.
well, that's what holds it in
In
place.
place. Yes.
Like the coffin bone
Yes.
and all that, I mean, is suspended inside the horse's hoof, and all these blood vessels and arteries and tendons and all this
All that lamina on the outside.
stuff is what holds it in place. So we'll definitely include that in the show notes. But before we leave the shoe topic, and I had known about the when the horse's hoof hits the ground, it actually expands, and that's literally pumping the blood up and down, healthy blood, which contains oxygen into the hoof and back up again. And that's important. But I'm also thinking as I'm listening to you talk, because the hoof is so small and the legs are so narrow, and yet it supports such a huge part of the horse, the entire horse. When they have shoes on, what is that doing to their shock absorbing abilities on those bones and tendons and ligaments?
It's not good. It's not good at all. Because I mean, your horse's frog is part of their shock absorption. And once you put a shoe on, you completely take that out. And then you also aren't getting that expansion and contraction. So that's gone.
So the analogy that I think about when I hear you say that, because that's what I was thinking in my mind. I just
Yeah.
wanted you to say it out loud. But it's like us running in clogs,
Yeah, like the wooden gnome clogs that you
wooden gnome
grab in
clogs,
the
or
garden.
or high-heeled shoes, or for men, those steel boots,
Mm-hmm.
or even cowboy boots. I mean, I know when my cowboy boots are wearing out because I can feel every step I take on the ground is just like boom, boom. So it's the same for the horse's hoof, yeah?
Absolutely. And you can feel it once you feel a really nice barefoot ride, you can feel it when you're riding. You can feel that shock coming all the way up the horse and through you. And the steps feel heavier and jerkier than a horse that's beautiful, sound, moving well, shock absorbing all the way up the leg.
Okay, now you got me thinking. We're going to take a left turn,
Okay.
which sometimes we do, because Laura and I are students as much as we're teachers, and we learn from each other and we learn from our students. Rocky, my Gypsy Vanner quarter horse cross. I've never ridden. I've always wanted a draft horse. I've never ridden one. And he is not a smooth ride.
Okay.
And what I've noticed is, and I'm going to have to, I've only ridden this horse like 5 or 6 times, you guys. So we're still in that honeymoon phase of getting to know each other and finding our rhythm. But listening to you say that, I can't help but wonder if the not smooth ride that I'm feeling is actually coming from his front end and not his hind end. And I kind of think that that's what I'm feeling now that you're saying that, because I have ridden barefoot horses for 20 or 30 years now.
Yeah.
So that's curious. I'm
Really interested. I mean, it could be a million things. It could be that he's for whatever reason, heavy on his forehand and needs you to help him get back. But it also could be that you are incredibly used to riding barefoot horses, and so it feels clunky to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even just at a walk, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
man, and at a trot, it's like, oh, holy moly, my lower back. Chiropractor, here I come.
Oh, and I don't think I really effectively addressed boots. So let me do that really quick. I keep my horses barefoot. I have boots. I ride in boots when we're going to ride somewhere that's significantly rockier or worse than her paddock, where she lives every day. Could she probably handle it? Yes. But again, a stone bruise becomes an abscess, becomes a headache. Throwing boots on is a really easy way to save yourself that headache. If you really don't want to deal with boots, you probably can get to a point where you can ride your horse barefoot. I keep an extra boot in my saddlebag if we lose one. It's nice to have them because, if I had a problem or I needed to protect her soul for any reason, they're right there, they fit, they stay on, it's a done deal.
Okay. Now, RC, my beloved RC, who ended up having to wear shoes because this pasture was wearing his hooves down to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what we tried, that's not true. For years, no matter what we tried, we couldn't get him barefoot. And then I got a new farrier who was highly more educated than the other farrier, who for years did a really good job with my barefoots. Within 6 months, had RC going barefoot.
Yeah.
But before I put shoes on him, which was before we moved here, I rode in the Sierra Mountains out my backyard for years, and he wore boots on the front. He didn't on the back. It was just the fronts that needed boots. It took me forever to find a boot that would freaking stay on. So I don't know. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then maybe we'll put something in the show notes if we need to.
Yes, we will put my boot lady in the show notes. She's awesome. So what the problem with boots is that every brand wants you to fit into their boots. Not every horse works for every brand. You got to find your brand. So the magic part of this is finding a boot rep who carries a lot of different brands and knows the ins and the outs of those brands. DT wore Cavellas because they were cheap and I was poor. And they clunked with every step. The boot would go down and then his hoof would go down. Clunk, 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 clunk. Also, when we went through a river, they would get sand in them. The water would drain out, the stand would stay, he would have rubs. And so if I took him through water, I'd actually have to get off, take the boots off, go through the water, dry them off, put them, who wants to deal with that on a ride? It's such a pain in the butt. So I am personally biased towards scoot boots being the best because they're all scoot boots.
Scooting your booty.
Yes.
Vet tech over here.
Yes. Yes. Because they're all rubber, there's no cloth, there's no straps. They're very user-friendly. But I do know that if you have a horse that does twisty landings, scoot boots can be a tough sell. So I'll put my boot rep. She has multiple brands. She knows, she can look at the shape of your horse's hoof and tell you, and you can say, oh, my horse has this special thing or that special thing. She can help you figure out the brand for you. Because if your boots are falling off and getting lost, or they're not comfortable for your horse, or they're very hard for you to get on and off, they're a pain in the butt. AMJ's boots slip on in, I pick her foot and put the boot on in the same motion. It's very fast.
So is this lady remote? So any of us anywhere? Oh, that's
a really great fitting program. So she'll send you a couple sizes. She has you send videos of the horse walking in the different boots and the different sizes, and she helps you figure it out. It isn't just like, here's a sizing chart, good luck, which I struggled with quite a bit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my next question, which I kind of think you've already answered, but we'll just throw it out there, is how do we know which is best, shoes, boots, or barefoot? And I think that your answer is barefoot, but it takes commitment.
Yep.
It takes curiosity.
Yep.
It takes the willingness to see it all the way through And it would take somebody like you to help us through the process. So when I say somebody like you, Laura, what do I mean?
So I can help you look at your horse's hoof. I can tell you what I see. Something we didn't even talk about is too high of sugar in a diet. I can look at if your horse is unshod. This is another reason why I'm a huge advocate for the barefoot hoof. I can trim MJ, walk her around the block, come back, pick up her hoof, see changes in that hoof. If I change her diet, I see changes in the hoof. The hoof is telling me, because I know that I have the hooves dialed in, they're telling me about how she's doing all the time. And that's such a hugely valuable thing. So I can help you figure out, is it the farrier or is it an underlying health problem? Now, I can't diagnose anything, but I can help you figure out where it's best to put your money. You know, if I look at your horse's diet and say it's probably pretty good, I don't see any huge red flags here, we can probably focus on, no, we actually need to get some imaging for this horse. So you got to go find a lameness specialist. I can help you look and say, actually, there's just little changes to be made here. I don't think you have a big problem. So let's just make our little management changes and not worry about it. Or, you know, your farrier needs to be dialed in a little bit, or your farrier is doing a really bad job. I can help you talk to your farrier, look at the whole horse, and make a plan to get your hooves in good shape.
Now, if you were to say, okay, I think that, nutritionally this seems okay, and farrier wise, it seems like it might be okay too. I recommend that you get some imaging done. Obviously, this is up to the veterinarian and his recommendations, but is blood work a good idea too to see where they are metabolically? To me, in veterinary medicine, we like, even if we have a healthy horse or dog or cat come in, we like to get a baseline. We want to know. Now, obviously, we're not going to say, oh, we should x-ray your horse, even though it's sound and looks moving. But we do want to do blood work to get a baseline on what's this horse's normal. And by the way, I'm not liking the way the hoof looks, so let's get a baseline on the hoofs and see, is this a congenital or is this, something going on? So would you, when you recommend to somebody that they might want to get imaging done and consult with a veterinarian, are you taking the blood work into consideration?
Absolutely. When I see a hoof with flaring, so you should be able to pick up your horse's foot and put a straight edge. The edge of a rasp is a great straight edge on it, straight up and down from the corner of your band to the tip of the toe, all the way around. That rasp should evenly contact that hoof all the way around. If you have a triangle of light, you have flaring. If you have flaring, you have inflammation. We need to check how your horse is functioning metabolically if you have inflammation, because if people addressed problems at first sight of flaring, we would not have laminitis.
Wow. Okay. No, that's huge because that is something that everybody can do with a ruler.
Yes.
Because not everybody has a rasp,
Any straight edge.
but everybody has a ruler. So I'm going to encourage you all to look at your horse, lift it up, look at those bulbs. Are there healthy boobies?
Yep.
Or are there cracks or flat? Does it look, remind me again, Laura, if we lift up the hoof and we're looking from the back side of it down, we see the healthy boobies, and then what are we looking beyond that?
You should see nice, even heels, not one that's longer than the other.
Okay. And then I want to get my ruler out.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that from the coronet band,
you're just putting it against your horse's hoof wall, following their natural angle.
and there should be no signs of daylight between my ruler and the hoof.
All the way down the length of it.
All the way down the length of it. So that's something you guys can all check out. And if you have any questions, always in the show notes is how to get a hold of Laura.
So you guys, as we're talking about this, I have a hoof health guide that has tons of photos in it of healthy hooves and the most common issues. And you can pull it up and compare your horse's hooves. It's free. I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes for you. Highly recommend that you get it, you compare it, and you start training your eye.
I want one for sure.
I want to talk about long toes. A lot of vets and old school farriers talk about long toes, long toes. We got to back up the toe. We got to back up the toe. We got to back up the toe. Or when you're looking at your horse and you're like, his angles just aren't quite right. His angles look funny and I can't figure out why. It's actually usually underrun heels. And what happens is the heels come so far forward that the whole sole stretches. So now you have an uncomfortable, painful, thin sole. And the toe looks super long because it's like with those clinky things, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And you take them and you shove them so that they're flat. And the accordion slinky, it sits on your desk as a cone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can flatten it.
Yep.
That's what's happening with an underrun heel in your horse. The toes look super long. But when you pick up your horse's hoof and you look underneath it, you can't take off more toe than there is hoof wall. In fact, you don't want to take off more toe than half the hoof wall. Otherwise, your hooves are going to start cracking and you're going to have problems. And so if you're battling long toes and you can't figure it out, it's the heels. You have to bring the whole hoof back and make your slinky all in line again. And then you have to completely regrow out the angle of that hoof and you will have it fixed. But one of the most common things I see in horses with like constricted, unhealthy heels is those underrun heels, and they want to chop the toes. And then what happens is you're cutting into sensitive hoof structure and introducing infection and pain, nasty, nasty, nasty stuff. If you think your horse might have underrun heels, please reach out to me. I offer a hoof health assessment. I can help you figure it out. I can help you talk to your farrier about fixing it.
And so the way that they can reach out to you for that hoof health assessment is in the show notes?
Yeah, if you get the free guide, we'll be connected and you don't have to worry about it. I'll be there.
And then one of my questions was, who can help us figure all this out? And it sounds like that's you.
I can help you to set up your horse's environment, their diet, their overall lifestyle to promote a healthy hoof and make sure that your farrier is doing a great job.
So you are, and I don't know your official name, but to me, you're like a horse husbandry and hoof care consultant.
Yeah, I'm a horse care mentor.
That's awesome. So be sure, you guys, if you have any questions about your horse's health, she's the one to reach out to. And the one last thing I want to ask in closing is we are transitioning more rapidly than we wanted to from summer to winter. What do we need to know about that?
So right now in California, horses' hooves are hard as rocks because it hasn't rained in 4 months. It sprinkled this weekend, and I was up bright early Sunday morning because it sprinkled on Saturday, zooming out to the barn because I knew all of these little things that have been driving me nuts on MJ's hooves that I haven't been quite strong enough to get cut because her hooves are so hard, we're going to be soft. And I did a beautiful trim on Sunday morning and I was so happy. So your horse's hooves are about to go, if you're in our climate. So just, you got to think about the climate that you're in and the changes that you're going through. For us, our horse's hooves are about to go from very, very hard to very soft. If there's inflammation and your lamina and your white line has been holding on for dear life, you could get an abscess from that. Anytime you're going from wet to dry, abscesses abound. Keep an eye out for separation in that white line and pay attention to, pack it with some good clay. I love Artimud clay. Artimud, Artimud.
Oh, never heard of it.
You can get it on Amazon. It's a natural clay with a bunch of bacteria fighting essential oils in it. You can pack it in any crack or anything. It kills thrush. It does a really, really great job. So anytime I see something that I'm like, I don't want bacteria going in there, I'm shoving it full of clay. So you're going to have softer hooves. You might see a little bit of tender hooves, but if your horse is healthy and solid, you aren't going to feel or see any major changes. Chronic abscesses are not normal, you guys. If your horse has chronic abscesses every time the weather changes, there's something bigger going on there. Your horse should be able to withstand the change. Now, in the winter, thrush is a big deal for us because it gets wet. Reminder that thrush is caused by poop, not mud. Keep your stalls, keep your pastures clean, make sure your horse isn't standing around in poop. That's the best management you can have for thrush. And then if you're in a very snowy climate, another argument for the barefoot hoof is you get those huge ice balls on your shoes. Horses do better in ice and in snow barefoot.
We when we lived in Truckee and RC had his shoes on, I pulled his shoes every winter because it was just too hard on him to have all that ice, and it gave his hooves a nice healthy break.
And that's a very common practice. And that's the thing. If you're in a sport or a world where your horse needs to wear shoes for a season, that's fine. Put shoes on them and enjoy your horse. Keep an eye on their heels and give them a break. It's the 24/7 shoeing that we really need to get away from.
In closing, Laura, any last tips or tricks for us beginners or experienced about hoofs?
So, I told you how we're going to talk about how maybe your farrier isn't great, but it's the only option that you have. Or maybe your farrier is doing a pretty good job, but he can only get to you once every 8 to 12 weeks because you're in a rural place and that's how it is. Have them teach you or find someone who can teach you to maintain your horse's bars and just use a rasp enough to keep your hoof wall level and beveled. And that is something you can do between trims that is going to keep your horse in balance for longer, even if your farrier can't get to you sooner. That's how I learned to trim MJ myself, is I started by, I'm just going to use my knife, and I'm just going to use my rasp, and I'm just going to use my nippers. And I went longer and longer between having my farrier come out and help me until finally she was like, this is a waste of time. You're doing great. You don't need me. And she fired me. But a good farrier isn't going to have a problem with you keeping your horse in better condition between their visits. They would probably be excited to teach you. And it's not as scary as you think it is once you learn the anatomy of the hoof and the landmarks and what you're looking at.
Well, this has been extremely educating for me anyway. I hope that all of you have found it as valuable as I have. Thank you so much, Laura.
Happy to nerd out about hooves anytime.
So if you have any questions about the topics covered in this episode, send us a message on our Facebook page, Holistic Horsemanship and Husbandry, and we will answer your question in a post on our page. You will be anonymous. We'll just take the question and provide our input, and we want to do it on the post so that we can all learn and grow together, because nobody knows everything. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. We want to remind you that we'll be here every second and fourth Tuesday of the month, following the golden rule. Have a plan, but always be willing to be flexible. Don't forget to connect with us using the links in the show notes below.
If you learned something new today, had an aha, or walked away with a valuable nugget, you can say thanks by leaving us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on.